I heard nobody.
You got it going, Don? Don, do you have it going?
Well, thank you. I told Don I had it in my schedule to do that, but then I had some other things come up that took me in today. Thank you so much for the invite. Thank you.
Well, should we get going?
Yeah, I'm ready.
We're gonna start the meeting. We've got kind of a smaller crowd here, but that's fine.
Yeah, not as
Darren's gonna speak to us. He's a conservationist with the National Resource and Conservation Service out of Sioux Falls. And he's gonna give us a little presentation on bee habitat and any programs available and seeds and that type of thing for us. Before we do that though, I got an order of business here today. I was going to ask the group how late we should meet in the fall and when we should start in the spring. Well, I got you here. Any ideas? We're stumping the group. Well,
Do we need to meet in October?
I think we should have a meeting in October.
on winterizing beehives.
We may actually want to start, I mean, if people got questions and want to know, we may actually want to start like in March before it gets
Okay.
warm enough to start checking your bees and stuff.
So what does the group think about having a meeting yet this next month?
Yep, I think so.
And talk about winterizing hives and any questions we got, make it just a discussion meeting.
Yep.
And then start in the spring and March with the first meeting on getting hives ready, getting ready for bees and checking hives and that kind of thing. How does that
I
sound?
think that's a good idea.
The group, raise your hands if you agree. Good, we're good to go. All right, and those who aren't here don't get a vote. That's how it works. So,
Yeah.
and I'm going to introduce Daren, and then Teresa wants to take over part of this discussion because she's a co-chair here.
Sure.
He's the one with all the answers. So Daren, thank you.
Yeah,
The
thank
floor
you,
is
Don.
yours.
All right,
Where's
thank
your-
you.
He's a good guy. He came out and helped me with the dam, and he brought a crew out. We got our dam fixed thanks to this gentleman.
We tried.
You did.
We tried.
Good job.
I'm going to keep this really informal today, so feel free to ask questions. I am not an expert on all of this. You guys are the ones with the bees. You probably know a little more than I do, but this is the communication and the conversation that we'll have. So my name is Daren Ruesch. I actually live in Crooks, so not too far from here. And my kids go to school here. My oldest just graduated high school last year, and he is at the University of Minnesota as a freshman. And my baby is here, and he's a junior in high school. So it's amazing how fast that goes. And I don't know, somebody can vouch for me that I'm here an awful lot with kids in school and part of the Tri-Valley Booster Club. But my title is District Conservationist. And I work for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is an agency within the Department of Agriculture. How many of you have heard of NRCS before? Just to kind of get a feel. How about the Soil Conservation Service? Have you heard of them? So back in 1993 was the last year of the Soil Conservation Service, and then they changed our name over to the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And so, yeah, we've been kind of around for a while. But I was just going to talk a little bit about pollinator habitat today, talking about some grass species. I had some really nice videos, and I thought my phone could get enough signal in here to play the videos, but it can't, so I apologize for that right now. But if there's any questions right away, if not, I'll get started with my conversation. All right. So NRCS, or the Soil Erosion Service, actually formed back in 1935. And the number one reason why it was created was what? What happened back in the 30s?
The Dust Bowl.
The Dust Bowl, the dirty 30s. And, that's when our founder, Hugh Hammond Bennett, really kind of stepped up and said, you know what? Our economy of our nation and our soils are so valuable that we needed to do something. The plains were being plowed up left and right, and then we hit that drought. So the mission of our agency, the simplest way to put it is, it's helping people help the land. What makes us really unique for our agency is most federal agencies work on public ground. The Fish and Wildlife Service, they can work a little bit on private ground, but they have their waterfowl production areas. You look at the Forest Service, they're in all the national forests working. My job is, I typically work on urban and agricultural land, and it's privately owned land. We just can't come onto your land and say, hey, we're gonna do this, we're telling you how to do that. We are invited in. We are invited on someone's land because they have objectives or goals for your operation that you are trying to meet. We're trying to develop some conservation plans, as well as hopefully maybe trying to find some financial assistance also. So with NRCS, we do offer a diverse array of programs and also just practical conservation. This is what we are passionate about. And again, we're on the privately owned land. But the most important idea is we offer planning assistance. If I don't know the answer, we have specialists, and I'm going to use you, Don, as an example, where I brought one of our engineers out to his place because we needed just a little more specialty and a little more experience on how that water flows. And Don was just telling me that his dam just survived 11 inches or 10 to 11 inches of rain. And if you ever paid attention, do you know how much 1 inch of rain is over an acre? That's 27,000 gallons. So you hit 10 inches of rain, that's 270,000 gallons of water per acre. And 1 acre is just a hair over about like 210 feet by 210 foot area. So, and I'm sure most of you probably got to experience some of that. Can I get an idea what counties everybody is from too? I forgot to ask that question. We got
Hutchinson and Turner.
Hutchinson and Turner? Lincoln?
Rural.
Rural?
Minnehaha.
Minnehaha?
Minnehaha and then Turner too.
Sure.
Same.
Same?
Lincoln
Lincoln?
in Sioux Falls.
In Sioux Falls?
Minnehaha.
Minnehaha? Okay. I also, so I manage the 2 NRCS offices both here and in Lincoln County. So I work out of the Canton office too. Conservation technical assistance, that's just our fancy word of just working with people. There is no financial obligation. There's no expense to you for us to come out and talk with you. It's just us having a conversation and inventorying what you have and setting your goals. So when we take a look at people's farming operations or your acreages, we're kind of looking at a thing called SWAPA. And if you take a look up here, we're dealing with soil, water, animals, plants, energy, air. And then you also have to take into consideration, the human factor. So a lot of our work is also done working with different partners. How many of you have heard of like the Lincoln Conservation District or the Minnehaha Conservation District? That's kind of more of the grassroots. They're co-located in our office, and they also can provide services. We work with wildlife groups like Game Fish and Parks Department, the Fish and Wildlife Service. We also work a lot with Extension, on a lot of agronomy aspects, and other government agencies. So NRCS actually has a strategic plan. Did you know that? So South Dakota NRCS actually developed a strategic plan. And we're going to kind of go through this really quick. So our leadership team put this together, and our #1 goal is to optimize the health of South Dakota soils. Our soils, it's what we walk on every day, it's what we drive on every day, it is what we plant our flowers or our crops and our trees. So so we are dependent on that resource. Improve and provide an effective supply of quality water. Again, something that we all need and use. Enhance habitat for healthy and balanced populations of non-game, which is our pollinators, as well as the game wildlife species, because you know the hunting industry is a big part of our economy in this state. And then to develop local food efforts that practice healthy food and economic opportunities. Again, that's where the bees kind of come into play, you know, to pollinate our crops, both from the agricultural side of things, and then too, if you're going into the vegetable aspect and doing a lot of the farmers markets. And then just continuing to build high-performing with organizations, the partnerships. And you know, when I was working with Don, this conversation just kind of happened, didn't it, Don?
Yeah.
We just started talking a little bit, and he's going, hey, would you like to come and talk to this group? And it's just like, he goes, did you know we meet up at Tri-Valley? And it's like, no, I did not. I had no idea. And you know, the opportunities that we get to come in and talk and to help educate, as well as for us to learn something, is wonderful. And then lastly, again, we just talked about the partnerships. So we're going to kind of focus on these three items today, just to kind of cover. We're going to talk a little bit about soils and soil health, if that's something you really haven't thought of before. And then we're going to definitely talk about the pollinators. And then in turn, you know, leading into our local food markets, whether you're selling honey or byproducts, or you're trying to get your vegetable gardens up and running. I know Don has a really nice vegetable garden, and maybe most of you guys do too, so. She does?
Yeah.
All right.
Hers is indoors, mine is outdoors.
And I may be preaching to the choir on this, but you know, just a few little interesting facts that I found is, you know, 3/4 of the world's flowering plants and about 35% of the world's food crops depend on pollinators. And have you ever seen that bee movie before? You know, when I sat down and watched that with my kids, I'm going, oh, this will just be kind of a really cute little movie. And boy, you know, how did they know to put that to kind of get a message across that we depend on it every day. Matter of fact, scientists estimate that 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we take depend on our pollinators. And those are just the little things that nobody ever really thinks about. And then the majority of the pollinators, of course, in South Dakota are our native bees and honeybees, and there's some beetles and some moths and some butterflies. And then the way I understand, they're doing some more research with bats too, and kind of how they play. And I couldn't find a lot of research data on that yet, but I do know there are some university studies on that. We were going to watch a quick little 3-minute video, and again, I'm going to try it here real quick to see if it's coming in. Yeah, it's just struggling to try to get good Wi-Fi connection in here. How many of you have gone on YouTube and watched videos? So this is kind of a quick, nice little one. It's called Pollinators NRCS. And it's actually the state of Michigan who has put this one on. And it just kind of gives just a real quick, brief overview of pollinators and the role that plays in our society. And I too can email this stuff to Don too, the links for these. So if you do want to take a look at that, we sure can do that.
I can send it out to the group.
Okay.
There's quite a few that aren't here tonight, or today.
Sure.
And, you know, our attendance varies up and down, so I can find it out, you know.
So I will do that, Don. Somebody asked a question about, how many acres do I need and how does that all play? This is a picture that I actually took this week. You can see the bumblebee right here. This is at our office in Sioux Falls. We have an area that is roughly about 6 feet by 6 feet. And we had a tree in there, and then our landlord came in there and cut it down this year. And so the conservation district said, hey, we got a few plants left over. Let's just plant them in the middle there. And if they grow, great. If they don't, great. But, instead of throwing them away. So they actually had a New England aster. And honestly, this week when that stuff really started to blossom, when I took that picture, there was 5 bees and 3 painted lady butterflies just on those blossoms. And that's just in one little area. So, you can see that. So when we talk about vegetation, we're looking at perennial vegetation, which, if you take a look, it's just stuff that is continuing to regrow. Every year, you don't have to do much work for it. You may have to do a little maintenance, but it dies, it goes dormant, and then it comes back next spring. So that's a lot of our wildflowers. And then the key thing, and you guys know this better than I do, is you're trying to feed those bees at all times. So you want something flowering in the spring, something in the summer, and then something in the fall. And just to kind of keep that continuation of food. The one thing we don't ever really think about is our annual flowers or our annual crops, such as gardens, where you're planting something every year from seed or from plants and getting them to grow. And then also the big thing is cover crops. With all this flooding this year, how many of you were driving around the countryside and you saw farmers planting like turnips and radishes? And have you been able to see some of those are starting to flower now? I actually went down in Lincoln County, walked out in a farmer's field the other day with him, and honestly, it was just a steady hum. To find out, there was some hives that were about a mile away. And wherever we walked, it was just a constant hum with the bees out there working. Any questions so far? Yes?
Did they plant those turnips and radishes because of the flooding this year and the corn not having time?
That's part of it.
Or do they always?
No.
So it depends on what they're trying to accomplish. The first thing is, this year, yes, because of the flooding and not having a crop, they were trying to get something planted to keep living roots in that soil and to help protect it from erosion. At the same time, that what they don't realize is, if they had it in early enough, some of that's going to start flowering, and then they're actually helping the pollinators out. Some producers around here put more grasses in, like cereal rye. It's a cool season grass. And they do that more for erosion after corn silage. Usually, if you can follow like a small grain like oats or wheat or even rye, a lot of people try to plant turnips and radishes afterwards, just to kind of keep a living root growing, because that crop is typically harvested, in July, maybe the first part of August. But I do know there are a few producers around here, and it's more out west, that are doing full season long cover crops, where they don't plant a row crop like corn and beans, but they will plant a cover crop, and they do that to maybe give their grass some rest while they're grazing their cows. But I know that there's been some studies done, and I know the Peer office has done it a lot, where they actually went out and ran transects through the cover crops, and they were trying to determine what species and how many bees in their transects that they were counting, and trying to determine what species they are I brought a copy of our cover crop sheet, and it's this single piece of paper. When you're looking at doing like an annual cover crop, if you take a look on the right-hand side, if you come back 2 columns, it says attract beneficial insects. It may not necessarily be pollinators completely. You know, you're looking at doing like some ladybugs and some other beneficial insects, but it'll tell you which species are good for the beneficial insects. And again, that's just kind of Mother Nature all working together. But yeah, good question. So, you know, what can we do as consumers, or having gardens, or having our own hives? Everybody's different. Everybody has their own goals and objectives. And, you know, lots of times we deal with people that come into the office and go, you know, do you have a program to help pay for this? I want to get to know the person first. I want to know what your goals are. If I don't know what your goals are, maybe that program really isn't for you. Maybe we need to contact the South Dakota Game Fish and Parks Department. Maybe there's another partnership out there that we can get you to go talk with to find that. Because we don't have money for everybody, but we can sure try to find a program that would fit, but we need to know your goals. Done.
Is there a pollinator habitat that also crosses over fairly good for pheasant habitat?
In my opinion, anytime that you have wildflowers in your mix, whether it's just a solid pollinator or it's in your CRP and you're adding in some wildflowers with that, pheasants depend on those flowers attracting insects and those insects dropping down, and that's what the chicks will start eating. So yeah, we recommend it. Probably the toughest thing to sell on pollinator habitat is everybody that drives down the road thinks it's a weed. If it has color, it's a weed and somebody should be killing that. That's not the case. You need to know your species, and it's amazing, it is amazing that we'll work with an individual and they'll do like a 2-acre plot, and they'll call us up and they go, have you seen so-and-so's plot? It's like, yep, it is solid weeds out there. There's yellow weeds and purple weeds and some orange weeds, and you know, you talk to them about wildflowers and they're going, well, that's not normal. It's like, well, this is what we're trying to do. This is the goals of that.
That's why a lot of people have a big sign that says pollinator plot, so we
Right.
understand it's not just a weed.
Right. And I would say, you know, the other challenge when people do pollinators is when the next door neighbors aren't taking care of their Canada thistles, because Canadian thistles can move in and they do like that light. And then, you know, wildflowers aren't a solid stand all the way through. But that's why we try to have at least 4 species that'll bloom in the spring, 4 species that'll bloom in the summer, 4 species that'll bloom in the fall. And then also we like to throw about 25% of the mix, throw a few grasses out there just to kind of help fill in some of those spaces. But yeah, that is amazing how many phone calls we get every year. And then you'll talk to somebody going, well, how about if you want to put some milkweed out there? It's like, oh no. My grandfather spent decades trying to kill that stuff off. However, on the positive note, if you drive around the county enough and you pay attention, there are a lot of farmers out there now that are mowing around patches of land. They are realizing that, oh, you know, they don't spread and don't affect my crop as much. Matter of fact, it was kind of funny. We were just at a cover crop workshop here this week that we had in the county, and we started by Renner and ended up over by Garrettson. And I was telling a producer, I remember as a kid, our trees being solid monarch butterflies. And I said, I hardly, you know, you'll see a few monarchs here or there on their migration south. And he says, you know, I've never thought about that. And his son goes, I've never seen that my entire life. And it's just like we talked about, you know, with the herbicides and the changes in agriculture, how milkweeds just disappeared like that fast. You know, as a kid, I walked beans with a hoe, and when we came to a milkweed patch, we pulled every one out by hand. And this is how science has evolved, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, the monarchs are using that. And the funny thing is, that night my dad called, he says, you won't believe it. He goes, I got a tree probably with about 200 monarchs on it today. And my dad is one of them that he will mow around milkweeds now, and because he's understanding, him and I talked about that, you know, as a kid, how many milkweeds we pulled out, and he says, I had no idea what we were doing. So, it's kind of interesting from that aspect. The second thing is, and this is probably the toughest one for our county, and is to protect from insecticides and herbicides. You know, not only from the sprays, but from the dust. A lot of the seed treatments with those, what do they call them,
Yes.
neonicotinoids? You know, just that little bit of dust can really affect our pollinators. And so, you know, that is always a challenge that we are going to have in South Dakota in trying to find an area where we can buffer that from. So the ideal pollinator habitat is having at least a 200-foot buffer around the area that you're trying to plant. And also, if you have your hives, it's trying to make sure those bees have a flight path where they have that much protection. Does everybody have a whole 640 acres of land sitting there? No. And, you know, any little bit of backyard conservation, you know, just like our office, planting a couple of New England asters in a little 6x6 concrete area, you know, anything that they can get food from and benefit from. The other thing, and you guys know it, southeast South Dakota has the higher population sink. And we've had it before where we had a new producer. He wanted some pollinator in a certain area, and we told him, it's like, you know, if your hives are across the road over here and you're planting it here, there's going to be problems with, you know, the bees going back and forth and getting hit by a lot of traffic because it was on an extremely busy road. And that's what he wanted to do, and yeah, then he came in and he says, you're right, we need to move it over here, just to change the flight of the bees. Know your soils. How many of you have heard of the Web Soil Survey? Don, you have? So NRCS, we have our Web Soil Survey online, and I can send the link out too with Don on that. And if you find a sheet of paper that says Table 3 Species Characteristics, it's just a list of a bunch of grasses, and it's got a lot of high, mediums, and lows on it. If you take a look, just turn to the very back page. And on top, the upper left-hand corner says MLRA 56 and 102A, B, or C. MLRA stands for Major Land Resource Areas. That's kind of how our soil surveys are. NRCS has mapped the entire state of South Dakota and pretty much the majority of the country, except maybe in the mountains. So they have boundaries that they have drawn with soil characteristics, and they've assigned ecological site descriptions. And what that is it takes a look at the characteristics of the location that you're in, as well as the characteristics on how those soils were formed. And just as you drive around, you will see some places, maybe Maximilian sunflower is growing really good in certain areas. And then you drive around and then you see some milkweed, maybe in a lower, wetter area. Across the top is the different ecological sites. And I'm going to show you some screenshots of our web soil survey, but there are species of flowers that do better in certain soils than others. And to me, that's a very important key, is to inventory what you have for soils, because you may be trying to start some species that like it really droughty, and you may go, well, they're dying, and you find out that your soils are maybe a little bit wetter, and yeah, those species just don't like it. And that's why we always recommend planting a diverse array of flowers, because Mother Nature will always readjust for you automatically. The flowers find their little niche, that little different climate that they do better in. So the more species you throw out there, the better chance of success that you're going to have. But I just wanted to put that out there and give you a copy of this. This information comes from our tech note, which was kind of all, our technical notes are put together by our specialists, as well as taking a lot of scientific data. So yeah, take a look at that, take that home with you. And then there are different MLRAs around the state. South Dakota on the southeast side, you know, the 102A, Bs, and Cs are pretty much this southeast corner. Once you kind of start hitting the Hutchinson County area, the soils start to change a little bit because the rainfall kind of changes up. And then too, the last thing you need to think about is your available resources. You know, what do you have for income? You know, are you looking at trying to get plants? Are you looking at trying to start something from seed? Do you have a mower to maybe, if you have just grass right now that you need to mow off, and do you have access to a drill to drill your species of flowers in? You know, those are just a lot of things to consider.
Question.
Yeah.
Can you mow off pasture and then drill in wildflowers into that grass mix in the pasture?
You can.
Okay.
It presents some unique challenges, just because, you know, that grass is so sod bound. You may need to hay it off and maybe do a couple of herbicide treatments to burn down that existing residue. If you try broadcasting the seed, you're not going to have real good success. And it all deals with the seed to soil contact. And getting a drill out there is something that's important to get that in the ground. All the wildflower seed doesn't have to get in the ground very far. That seed is really small, and if you've planted some before, you probably realize that. Yes?
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, some alfalfa was planted. So how could I drill wildflowers into that now? And will they make it with the alfalfa?
The alfalfa is going to outcompete them. Alfalfa is kind of more of a cool season. And then depending on how thick that alfalfa was planted, if they seeded it to be hayed off or chopped off, we don't recommend putting wildflowers out there because that alfalfa is going to grow so thick and choke those areas off. Yeah. And we already kind of talked about this. Plant pollinators that are going to be growing during all seasons. And on that sheet that we were just talking about, that very first page, it talks more about the grasses. If you flip over, so it'd be, it'll say like page 33 of 100 here at the bottom. We're about right in the middle, this row across the top, it says season of use. And if you go down that column, it'll tell you that if it's good for spring or summer or fall, or you get some of the clovers that they grow year round. But that's just kind of another fun little thing too. You can see that the bloom period, like if you take a look at, well, let's just use the Illinois bundle flower. July to August is typically when that will bloom. So knowing the species of those wildflowers and to put your mix together, that's a real valuable resource. And then too, if you want to get into the cover crop aspect, usually cover crop seed is a lot cheaper than what our wildflower seed is. However, wildflowers are perennial, where the cover crops is every year. So hopefully you just have to drill your wildflowers in just one time, and you can reap the benefits for years to come on that.
Does the NRCS have a drill that'll seed that at the right level and stuff like that, or what?
Yeah, so NRCS does not have a drill. We don't, being a federal agency, we can't do the work. One of our partners, Game Fish and Parks, may have a drill, but the conservation districts, most counties have a drill for drilling in native grasses and wildflower seed. Yes?
Could you use a no-kill drill to put the seed in, or sod and stuff?
You could. You just need to make sure that the seed, but you have the proper seed boxes on that no-till drill with the grass and the wildflower. And every drill is just a little bit different, but yes, you could do that. But again, you want to make sure you have the grass and wildflower seeding attachments for that.
Question, are those habitats, do they reseed themselves year to year?
Once you get into the wildflowers or the native forbs as well as the grasses, they will do both seed and do the vegetation part of it, where it's a perennial plant. Now there are some wildflower species, such as black-eyed Susans. They do really well those first few years, and then you'll kind of see them back off. They kind of need fire or a disturbance to kind of get them really fired up and going again. If you take a look to, before I moved up here to Crooks, I lived down in Vermilion, and I had a few acres, so I did play around a little bit with the species, and yeah, after about 3 years, yeah, my black-eyed Susans, you didn't see a lot of them, and then I had a half-acre patch that I burnt off, and it was amazing how fast they came back. And a few years later, they would slowly start disappearing again. So that's a disturbance once in a while is a good thing. And then, like the Maximilian sunflowers, you see them growing in moist areas. There's millions of seeds per pound in that. I took 4 ounces and planted on a half an acre, and that wildflower took off like crazy. And no matter what I did, if I tried to spray it, I didn't have a lot of other species with it, but it came in so thick every year, and this is the time of year that it's blooming. But it's knowing those characteristics of those flowers and knowing your soils that can help determine that. Good questions. Here's the web soil survey. We're going to kind of do a quick little look. Again, if you Google it and you just type in web soil survey, it'll bring it up. And when you get there, this is what you want to look for, this little Start WSS, and that's the Web Soil Survey. And we're going to take a look at some soil types and ecological site reports. And Don, since you're just down the road over here, I used yours for an example today.
Perfect.
I didn't call you on that, I hope you're okay.
We're fine.
So,
I'm fine with it.
you know what's really cool about the Web Soil Survey is you can search by address. If you type your address in, it'll zoom right to that address. You can do a search by your section, township, and range, you know, based on the plat book. You can do a search by your county. The Web Soil Survey is a public domain. It's for everybody. That's not personally identifiable information. So if you're ever looking at wanting to buy a parcel of land, that's available online for you to take a look at. Wish it was just a tiny bit darker in here. So yeah, Don lives down the road, and I know it's probably hard to see, but right through here, there's a button up here called AOI, and that's Area of Interest. And so all you do is you kind of draw what you want to take a look at, and it'll run some blue hash marks across it. And at the top here, this is probably one of the most confusing things about our Web Soil Survey is you have a toolbar that goes in this column, but then there's different tabs across the top. So I just wanted to kind of point that out too. So the first thing you do is you do your area of interest, and then you click on the soil map button, and it'll actually, and you're pretty consistent with your soils, Don. There's a soil type here right in the northwest corner, and then this is all fairly close to being the same soil. But it'll give you a report. It'll give you what they call the map unit symbol. That's just what the soil scientists have assigned. And then it'll tell you, it's like a Moody, Nora, silty, clay, loam, 6 to 9% slopes. And it'll break out how many acres in that area of interest there is. So that's kind of interesting too. The next thing is you come up here, you can go into the, can't read that, suitabilities and limitations for use. There are probably, I never figured it out, but it's over 100 different reports that you can pull for your soils. And if you go down this column and you go to Ecological Site ID, and then you go down here and pick NRCS rangeland site, you can generate a report by click on View Rating, and it'll tell you if it's a loamy or a meadow, or if it's thin upland site, and you take that rating, and you can take that and go right back to the species chart. And like loamy is LM, and you can go right down the list and see what species grows best in the loamy site. If you have loam, that is the ideal. That means you have a really good mixture of sand, silt, and clay. If you have a really, really steep, hilly site, more than likely that's considered a thin upland because you don't have a lot of topsoil. Might be a little bit droughtier soils. And then if you take a look here, here's one that says a linear meadow. And yeah, it's just a whole different array of species for that. But that's something that you have access to. It used to be that NRCS would have a soil survey book that you could get free from the offices. And now with technology, everything is changing over. And I'm going to tell you something that's even crazier, is there is a Web Soil Survey app. that you can download. And when you turn on your GPS on your phone and you walk out to your soils or on your land, based on this information, it'll tell you what kind of soil you're standing on. Now, the thing about mapping our soils, and something to think about is, our soils are kind of general information. Because of the scale that they had to map at, usually they couldn't get smaller than 3 acres in size. So sometimes on your soils, you're going to have what they call inclusions, which you may have a wetland area within these soils. So there is information on the Web Soil Survey about what other soils you may find out there, but just how they had to map them back in the day. If they had to map every half-acre spot, it would cost tens of millions of dollars to do that for one county, and most counties can't afford that. But it is amazing. You can also go in and talk to your local office if you have questions about your soils, and they can sure sit down and talk to you about those. Or they can also demonstrate or help you run the Web Soil Survey. But something kind of fun, something to think about. Here's another really good site if you're looking for fact sheets or information on native forbs, or really kind of any kind of native plants in the United States. Is NRCS actually has a plants database. And if you take a look over here along this column, they got alternative crops, characteristics, cover crops, fact sheets, and plant guides. And they have them even on weeds. So you can learn about weed species too if you really are inclined to do that. Here is another fun little video, and again, I apologize for it not working. It is called The 5 Steps to Success. And it's about a 7-minute long video, and it talks a little bit about step 1, finding your location. Step 2, if you're planting for pollinators, maybe you want to plant a few shrub species to kind of provide a little bit of a buffer if your neighbor is doing some spraying of insecticides, something to help protect that area. It's a nice little video, and I'll send that out too.
Question on that.
Yeah.
How much of a buffer do you need when the aerial spray insecticide for aphids and bees?
To be effective,
How far away do you need to be
at 200 feet.
with the hives?
Yeah.
Is that far enough away?
The further, the better.
I got sprayed on one side with a fungicide for corn and the other side with the insecticide for bees, but my bees survived, okay.
Yep, and a lot depends on the chemical they're using, and then hopefully, you take a look on a windy day. Hopefully you are upwind of that, so it's not coming on you. And there a lot of producers are trying to make sure that they don't have any of that drift or carryover, but it does happen.
I talked to the guys on both sides and I asked them if they'd let me know before they spray, if they do it early in the morning.
Yep.
And they agreed to, so they've been real good about it.
Yep.
But they still,
Sure. And that's just that communication that you have to have. So that's a little bit just about pollinators and soils and kind of the species. Everybody's site's a little different. If you have really specific questions, I can sure try to help answer that. Yeah.
We're talking about crops, and what about mosquito spray in town?
That is something that I've had that question asked, and I have asked that to a couple of our specialists, and I don't know the answer to that.
The 200-foot rule would still, you don't, yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. I was just asked that probably about 2 weeks ago.
And all the yard treatments,
Yep, that I don't know enough of, and we had training here, and I asked the city of Sioux Falls about it, and they didn't know it this time. But that's a good question. And the one thing I haven't done is talk to Extension, because they have entomologists on staff, and to ask them if they have any knowledge. And I have not gone online to research a lot of the chemicals that they use for spraying for mosquitoes. So with that, got another question? Yeah.
Is there government assistance for pollinator habitat?
Yeah, I'll get into that here in a little bit.
Sorry.
Yep. So you'll hear a lot about NRCS talking about soil health principles too, and this applies to everybody, whether you're gardening, whether you have a small acreage. But I always have to throw my 2 cents in with the soil health principles. Using a diverse, array of plants to add diversity. If you look at back when the buffalo used to roam the prairies, they would come in, they would trample, they would graze, and then they would leave. And so, having a really diverse array can handle a lot of the different conditions. Can it handle 10 inches of rain? Can it handle the drought? Even with cover crop species, they're finding out that just don't plant oats, just don't plant radishes. Plant a cocktail of mixes because they feed off of each other. One may put a little extra nitrogen fixing in. One may, radishes will actually form a little microclimate underneath where the microorganisms can act a little bit longer on that residue, converting that residue into organic matter. So, it goes the same with wildflowers and native forbs. Manage more by disturbing less. If you look at what holds your soils together, it's full of biology. And there's glumalin, and it starts forming all this fungi and mycorrhizae, and they're all working together, and they're forming soil aggregates. And to look at your soils, if you take a spade and you dig down, and if it comes up in a big clod and you have to break it apart, that soil structure isn't there. Usually, if you have really good soil structure, when you dig that up, it just kind of crumbles apart. You can pick it up, you kind of see it's like a bunch of little clumps together. It's the same way like if you pull like your plants out of your garden and that soil is sticking on there, that is good soil health when you see that all working together. Keep the soil covered as much as possible. 10 inches of rain. I mean, that is like hundreds of millions of little mini bombs going off on your soil, and you're trying to absorb that energy that raindrop is bringing. Also, they've done studies that the amount of soil that blows even in like a 15-mile-an-hour wind in South Dakota, which we would call a calm day, it's amazing that you get soil particles that start rolling, and then you get, that's called seep, and then you get soil particles that start bouncing, and every time they bounce up, they're dislodging more. That's called saltation, and then the dirty 30s, when you have it in air, that's suspension. And does that happen around South Dakota yet? Absolutely. And then, all of those chemicals or that fertilizer is all being transported, with that soil. So trying to keep that covered and keep it on your land is valuable. Growing roots, keeping living roots growing throughout the year. That's just trying to keep that biology all stimulated. Also, trying to get water infiltration to help with runoff. And when we hit the dry years, if you can increase your organic matter by 1%, you can hold 1 extra inch of moisture. And on a drought year, that can make a huge difference on your species. And then two, not everybody can do this, but if you can integrate livestock, kind of like the buffalo did, you know, where you had that little bit of disturbance. So programs, we're kind of at the end of my talk here. The Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. How many of you have heard of that before? All right, we'll talk about that. We got the Conservation Stewardship Program. And then we also have our Agricultural Easement Program, which kind of covers our wetland reserve easements and our agricultural land easements. I'm not going to get big into the WRE, the wetland reserve easements. We have a program if you have wetland areas that you're trying to protect or you want to restore. That's a program where you can do a 30-year easement on or a perpetual easement. With all the rain we've been having, we've had a few people that are going, I'm tired of this, I want some hunting land, or I just need to set this land aside. And you can actually receive a payment for that easement. With our easements, when we do seedings, we do include wildflower mixes with those. The easements are really meant for migratory species. Well, monarchs are migratory species. So yeah, we're really trying to target our pollinators to kind of get that dual benefit out of those easements. But EQIP, all of our programs are voluntary. Every one of them. There's nothing that we come out and say, you have to do this. It provides both financial and technical assistance to help implement different conservation practices. And some of the more common ones that we've worked with is doing conservation cover, planting grasses, helping with cover crops, crop rotations, you know, maybe adding small grain into a corn and soybean rotation. And naturally, we do have pollinator habitat up there. That is becoming a more and more brought to the forefront. And also with pollinators is adding in the monarch habitat with that also. It's basically, we'll design a conservation plan for you. You do compete for those dollars, and if you're funded, then when you implement that conservation practices, like you plant your flowers, then there is a practice payment that you would be reimbursed. The key thing is you are competing against other people, but that's where our agency steps in and we help you through that process. You do have to have your land or farm signed up in the federal farm program, so you would have to work with the Farm Service Agency with that. That's just something that we can help you when you come into the office. South Dakota usually gets about $13 to $15 million a year for this program. And again, it covers everything from animal waste systems to grass waterways to pollinator habitat. I always say we always have more applications than we have money, which is wonderful to see, but that's something to keep in mind too. With our programs, like if you want to seed something right now, we would be competing for dollars for next year. So that's something to keep in mind too, is you always need to try to start a year before you want to do the work. If you do the work first and you come in and go, do you have money to help pay for this? The answer is no. We have to have a plan in place prior to having the work completed and having a contract. And I can't emphasize that enough. There's so many customers that come in after the fact, and it's just, and then they go, well, how come we didn't know about this? We can get you on emailing lists, pay attention to the newspapers, and then South Dakota NRCS actually has a website. That's another good place to kind of troll around and pay attention to with that. CSP, the Conservation Reserve Program. This is a unique program because it takes a look at your current operation and what you're currently doing and what level of conservation are you at. Are you moldboard plowing, or maybe are you no-tilling? And then within this program, to take you up to that next level of conservation, you can do like pollinator habitat. And we actually have a few producers that have a protected area by their shelter belt that they're putting a half an acre of pollinator habitat in. Or they may be planting some species of flowering shrubs to protect that pollinator habitat. And there are hundreds of different enhancements that people can do. And yeah, this is the first year where we're not doing it by acres, but typically South Dakota has been putting in about 1 million acres of this. And it goes from grazing all the way to the cropland. CRP, that is probably our number one program for doing pollinator habitat. That program is actually administered through the Farm Service Agency. But you basically need land that has a cropping history, and then you can sign up for a 10-year contract where you can get an annual payment. It's like a rent check for signing up that land. And then there's also cost share to help plant those flowers. This past summer, they had a sign up, and this is the first time that they did not have pollinator habitat in that. And part of the reason is, with the new farm program, nationally they increased the amount of acres that they can accept into this program. So hopefully this next sign up, that will have more of the pollinator mixed in. But even if you're doing like a grass filter strip or doing a wetland restoration, we're putting a buffer around that, we can still work in wildflowers with that mix. But pollinators, that's where we usually have a minimum of like 12 species of flowers and a couple species of grass that we put into those mixes. And lastly, you always got to say this, Hugh Hammond Bennett said it the best: if you take care of the land, it will take care of you. So with that, I got my contact information. I threw a lot of information out at you. It's kind of quick and dirty and fast, but you know, I can take any other questions. If you think of anything else, you can always give me a call. I can send this PowerPoint presentation out too, Don. I can get that scanned and we can send that out as a document. So that's all I really had for my presentation. I got a lot of handouts. These are some fact sheets that NRCS has put together. There's one on the honeybee. There's one on pollinators and why we should care. On the honeybee one, if you take a look in the back, it talks a little bit about some of the wildflowers and their bloom periods. So if you're trying to look for some species, you can take a look at that. It's a lot of information in a few sheets of paper. The pollinator ones here, there is some examples of some really diverse seed mixes that our biologists have developed. You can take a look at that. I mean, they even have it down to how many seeds per square foot that you should be planting. So that's pretty interesting to look at that. We already talked a little bit about the species and the ecological sites. We got the cover crop one, and then there's a single page one with the monarch butterflies and some of the species that you can incorporate in your mixes too to help with the monarchs. And the number one species for monarchs is what?
Milkweed.
Milkweed, yep. So with that, that's all I had. So thank you so much for inviting me in, and glad we had a beautiful day, and it sounds like you guys got some more entertainment here at your next stop. So thank you very much.
Daren, thank you. You've been an
Yeah, you're
outstanding
welcome.
guy. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Our group is new and we're growing and we're just trying to get you know, people have been raising bees here a long time, but we've never had a physical place to meet till now. So we're just trying to get the group up and going. So I hope you'll come back to see us again
You
sometime
bet.
there.
You bet.
I
Just keep me in your email link. The Minnehaha Conservation District just received a conservation collaboration grant from the NRCS, and they are starting to work on some of the local food markets, as well as bringing on a technical expert to help with the gardening, and they're hoping to incorporate some of this pollinator and soil health stuff in here too. So I kind of told you a little bit about that, Don. So that's all being developed. They're working with the city of Sioux Falls on that. So stay tuned for more information. I think their grant is good for like 3 years, I believe. So, and you know, we know the value, and you know, with all the different hives, you know, you look at the state of South Dakota map and what's going on around our state. There's way more out there than I even knew when I first started working with pollinator habitat here just a few years ago. And I'm always looking for advice too. You know, there's things that work for some people and things that don't, but you know, anytime that I can learn too is a good thing. So hopefully you found this pretty informational. You know, trying to talk with Don and trying to come up with some different thoughts and how to approach that. So I thank you for the questions and your attentiveness today. So thank you very much.
Where do you get the seeds?
Oh, the seeds, yep. So the seed, you can work through your conservation districts. They can help order seed for you too. They also can get plants. They get plants from the Big Sioux Nursery up in Watertown. You can go to local seed dealers. We're not supposed to recommend one over the other, but Mustang Seeds, Milborn Seeds, there's Dan Beston, and then there's a lot of online, there's let's see, Lacrosse Seeds, and then I think there's some out of Nebraska too, and there's a lot online. And again, you know, get a seeding plan together and then get estimates. Drilling, you know, you could talk to a local producer, you could talk to the conservation districts, or they may give you a name and number too.
How many acres? Do I have 100 acres?
You know, we say with pollinators, the more the merrier. I saw, when I was on a work detail down in Iowa, yeah, we saw some 50-acre fields that were all pollinator habitat. But again, backyard, you can just do like a little 100 square foot section that may be 10 by 10 or 2 by 5 even, do a 10-foot square. So it's kind of up to you on what kind of land that you have and where you can put it. Wildflowers to grow in really wet sites is tough. And the species that you put in there typically are a lot more costly. You know, so if you can find some area that's fairly level and out of water, you can get a lot of different species to grow there.
I have a couple inches of topsoil and then gravel.
There are species that can handle that. Yep, and more than likely that would be more of your droughty soils, like your thin upland, the TU. That would be one to take a look at those species. Yep. The WM on that chart stands for wet meadow. And again, those are some species, and yeah, wherever there's a number at, those numbers kind of give you an idea of what percent of the mix Mother Nature more than likely had. Our soil scientists have tried to study the succession of the prairie, and native prairie is a rare thing, and we will never get back to that. But we can sure try by putting a diverse mix in. And we can always try. All it takes is one moldboard cloud to destroy it, of what Mother Nature took thousands of years to develop. And that's why it's called conservation. You know, you're trying to work within, trying to preserve your soils, protect your soils. At the same time, you're trying to work with, you know, the corn and soybeans with our ag industry in the state, as well as wildlife. And it's all getting that to work together.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate it. Let's give him a big hand. Teresa's got some things she wants to say here.
Just 1 minute of stuff is all. When I put it on the name for our group, we've never really came up with a name, so I thought we could think about that for October. When I put it on Facebook, it's just local beekeeping group, and it's put on the Sioux Falls area beekeeping group. So, but a lot of them have, like the Black Hills, they have a name, and I didn't look that up, what it was. But if we could come up with some ideas of, you know, what we're going to call, so that we can do more advertising. We were thinking of, KLO has that boredom thing.
Boredom
that they put-
Busters.
What's it called?
Boredom Busters.
Yeah, Boredom Busters. Trying to get on there, and I got the guy's website, and do more of that next year. And get more advertising, you know, than what we're doing just with the emails and with the, you know, this little bee group that we've got on Facebook. The other thing is we're actually doing honey today. We are extracting it, and so come over to the house, and we got Indian tacos, and just kind of see our setup. It's primitive, and
That's very nice.
But it works. So, and that's all I have, and we'll see everybody October the third
Saturday.
Third Saturday, whatever date that is.
Yep,
The
third
19th?
Saturday we'll meet. Same time, same place, and
Great.
next week will be, next meeting will be strictly on winterizing hives. Any ideas, suggestions will all be welcome. Alrighty, and then the snacks are at Teresa's.
Yeah, and if you brought anything, just bring it over there.
There, that sounds great. What? Oh, jeepers. Marilyn, good thing you're here. I'd forget my name if I didn't. We've got a card here. We got a card here for everybody to sign. It's to thank Tri-Valley for letting us use the school. They're not charging us anything, and we get to use this place whenever we need it on a Saturday, as long as they don't have a function in here. So I think it'd be pretty nice to send them a thank you note. So if you guys want to write a little note or just a thank you from the group, or it'd be really appreciated. And we're going to bring this next meeting too, for those who didn't get to sign this meeting. Yes.
She wants the name for the group, what's that, a Tri-Valley group?
If we
We'll
can,
be here all the time.
if we can stay here. Yeah.
That's an
That's
unknown at
another
this point.
question.
No, but it's a good suggestion. We'll bring that up next meeting, and then that'll be one of our topics next week, all right? But that's a good point.
What were the directions again to this young lady's place?
To Teresa's place, you go to the corner down here, go 2 miles to the south, you're gonna hit Blacktop, going east, or going west. Go 1 mile west.
I'm good. I went in here in time, except every road I tried to take was road closed due to flooding, road closed due to flooding. And then I even tried to pull it up on my GPS, thinking, okay, well, my GPS should have roads closed. Nope, so it's still trying to take me this route, and nope, road closed. Like, I'm coming from Garrettson, so I even tried to go north and over. So you're trying to and I'm coming across the river, yeah. And every single road closed due to flooding. It's like, oh my gosh. So finally I ended up coming all the way to the interstate and coming around. is how I married. Oh, yeah. I think so. I'll follow somebody too. I think a few of us are on our way over.
Otherwise she'd be here, so she's on the list, she gets, she tells me she always gets them, so we have nice to reproduce.
I walked in late because I couldn't answer. I made it, just late. I come from American, so I crossed the river. So every route I tried to take, road closed due to flooding, road closed due to flooding. I was like, oh, there.
Come in from the east here?
Well, no, because I ended up having to go all the way over I-90 and like over and then back up because every single route along there is road closed.
But now, like to get here, will you go to the First Mile Road West or east? Because
I'm going to Teresa's.
Oh, okay. Okay. Because I was thinking, you want to sign this? I think it went east. I haven't signed it. Because we're chatting.
It's her card.
Yeah.
I think we better go home and everything.
Every single route I tried to take, every road was road closed.
Well, yesterday, the Salvation Army has an annual fundraiser, which is yesterday in the farmer's market.
Well, that would be
By the Cartwright College. It wasn't very much stuff, and they said they could only go to 2 hours because of the flooding.
That's, yeah, you know.
It's the same thing. So give it to the. So you know.
Yeah.
Right. And so radio trouble.
Well, we're gonna stop over, but we both have another commitment, so we're just gonna do what we can. But the extraction would be very helpful. Oh, I'm gonna get some RDOs in here, I'm gonna take some.
Well, and I was sitting in front of my sewing machine right before I was on my way over to.
Oh, a nice little distraction.
I'm so close to finishing my quilts. I was like, I gotta go home. But no, I'm gonna go to church.
Yeah, the Rome is, right, that's party.
All right.
It's cheap and it grows and pretty much the same latitude that was in Europe across here. And if you're trying to get cover and something.
Yeah, I just sit here the whole time.